Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku become nightmare. If you guys enjoyed this movie, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story 𝐬𝐻𝐻 2022 from 𝐬𝐻𝐻. So let's start the video. Todoroki looked around his classmates. Everyone was having fun, drinking soda and laughing. Hell, even 𝗵𝘃𝐻 was downstairs, though he was mostly just complaining to Kirishima about wanting to go back upstairs and sleep. Kirishima was hanging off of 𝗵𝘃𝐻, pleading with him to just relax. Todoroki would never stop wondering how Kirishima had gotten into 𝗵𝘃𝐻's good graces, enough for him to hang off of him and tease him. The last time anyone else had tried that, they had almost gotten their arm blown off. Poor Kaminari barely talked to him for a week. The majority was in the main living room dancing, with the exception of Sato and Ida, who were pouring soda in the kitchen and making snacks. Mina and Gyro were the unofficial DJs and were blasting some sort of American pop music. Todoroki wasn't the biggest fan of their music, preferring the quiet, traditional Japanese music, but it wasn't like he was an expert. Even 𝗵𝘃𝐻 had been pulled onto the dance floor, albeit reluctantly. Todoroki had noticed that 𝗵𝘃𝐻 had been a lot less explosive recently, both figuratively and literally, especially towards Midoriya. He had almost seemed softer, as if he was walking in a minefield, and if he stepped in the wrong place, then Midoriya would explode. Still, Midoriya was never one to miss a party, and heaven forbid he missed 𝗵𝘃𝐻 dancing. Todoroki started towards the kitchen. He had been pulled into the dance floor by Aoyama earlier, and he hadn't gotten a chance to drink anything yet. As he walked in, the sweet smell of sugar filled his nose. Sato was standing by the oven, his arm moving in swift motions. "Hey, where's Ida?" Sato turned his head, never pausing while mixing batter in a large bowl. "He left for the bathroom a few minutes ago." "Why, did you need something?" Todoroki shook his head. "No, not for anything in particular. I was just wondering if he'd seen Midoriya at all." Sato narrowed his eyes. "Wait, you haven't seen him? He's usually the life of the party." He shrugged. "Well, I haven't seen him, and considering that Ida's been in here with me for most of this, I would guess that he hasn't seen him either." He smiled guiltily. "Sorry." Todoroki waved his hand. "No, it's all right. I was just a little concerned. Midoriya loves to hang out with everyone." He saw several bottles of ramyun sitting on the counter. "Mind if I take a couple?" Sato shrugged, turning back to the oven. "I don't care, it's not like I'll drink any of it anyway. It tastes like TV static." Todoroki smiled and nodded, grabbing two and leaving the kitchen. 𝗵𝘃𝐻 had managed to escape the dance floor and was pinning Kirishima against the ground. "Make me dance one more time and so help me not even All Might could save you." All that made Kirishima do was laugh, and agree to never do it again. Todoroki smiled softly, knowing full well that 𝗵𝘃𝐻 would never hurt Kirishima. He was about to head upstairs to look for Midoriya when he noticed the dorm room entrance cracked open. As he walked closer, he could see a familiar head of messy green hair. Todoroki slipped through the door, closing it. Midoriya jumped, and for a split second, Todoroki thought he saw droplets of liquid fly in the air. "Todoroki, what are you doing out here?" Todoroki sat down on the step next to him. "I could ask you the same thing." He held out one of the ramyun sodas. "Want some?" Midoriya smiled weakly, taking it. "Thanks." He popped off the lid and took a sip, smiling at the sweetness. Todoroki followed suit and looked up at the stars while drinking. He takes a side glance at Midoriya. He looks so tired. "Hey," he started. "Are you okay?" Midoriya met his eyes. "You usually never pass up the opportunity to relax. You even missed Kirishima dragging 𝗵𝘃𝐻 onto the dance floor." Midoriya chuckled. "Has 𝐾𝐦 killed him yet?" "Not yet." He looked at Midoriya sternly. "But you didn't answer my question." Midoriya smiled, but even Todoroki could tell it was fake. "Yeah, there's no need to be worried. I just didn't feel up to it tonight." Todoroki couldn't stop the prickle of hurt at his words. "I thought I was your friend." Midoriya looked at him with horror, putting his hands on Todoroki's shoulders. "Of course you're my friend. What made you think you weren't?" Todoroki shrugged, making eye contact. Worried green eyes filled his vision, and Todoroki didn't miss the dark spots underneath, or the veins in his eyes. "He's been crying." "You're lying to me." I thought that friends weren't supposed to lie to each other. Midoriya froze, looking away in shame. He gently lowered his arms. It's really stupid. Todoroki shook his head. I may not have known you for very long, but I know you well enough to know that not once has something stupid ever come out of your mouth. He leaned in, desperately trying to get him to make eye contact. Now tell me what's wrong. Midoriya sighs. I've been having nightmares. It always happens around this time of year. And tonight is just not one of those nights where I feel like partying. Todoroki paused. He'd dealt with enough nightmares in his lifetime, more than one ever should have. But he couldn't say that he'd dealt with them in the healthiest manner. And he'd never had to help others with theirs. Midoriya closed his eyes. Before, they were always about my dad. But ever since the training camp, he trailed off. They've been about 𝐽𝐻𝐬. Todoroki sat in silence, waiting for his friend to continue. I had no idea he also had problems with his father. Todoroki looked at the pained expression on Midoriya's face. Maybe that's why he sticks around All Might so much. He's like a father figure. In most of them, Muscular kills him before I'm able to help. Other time, he kills me. In some of them, it's my dad in the place of Muscular. Midoriya clenched his fist, shaking. I know they're not real, but I can't stop thinking about how easily I could have failed. 𝐽𝐻𝐬 could have died because I wasn't strong enough. And every time I look at the scar on my arm, I'm reminded that things could have ended very differently. They sit in silence for a moment. Todoroki was the first to speak. I used to have nightmares too. Deku looked at him with surprise, and Todoroki rolled his eyes. I've already told you about what my mother did to me. That doesn't even begin to cover the hell that my father put me through. It shouldn't be a surprise that I have them. Deku shook his head. Of course not. I should have expected that. He chuckled. And that makes me even more pathetic. That scar on your arm is a reminder that you survived, Midoriya. You're right, things very well could have ended differently. He gently grabbed his friend's hand. But you were strong enough to stop him and save 𝐽𝐻𝐬. That takes a lot of strength. Midoriya sat quietly as Todoroki continued. And yeah, the training camp ended badly. But you saved him, and you tried to save Bakugo too, even when you could barely move. For shit's sake, Xiaoji was carrying you. Todoroki jerked as tears fell from Midoriya's face. I messed up. Oh no. Oh, I'm sorry, Midoriya. I didn't mean. Do you want to know what happened with him? My dad, Todoroki paused. Midoriya, you don't? It's fine, Todoroki. Really? He sighed. You told me about yours, so it's only fair to tell you about mine. His green eyes darkened, and he turned to look up at the stars. My dad left when I was about 5. He wasn't always bad before we learned I would be quirkless. He was the best dad ever. His voice filled with venom. He left because he couldn't handle having a quirkless son. Todoroki looked at you, in the distance. That's right. You didn't develop your quirk until middle school, right? Midoriya tensed, then nodded. After he found out I was quirkless, he and Mom fought a lot. Every day I would come home from school to them fighting. He looked at the ground, shaking. Sometimes it would get physical, especially when he would try and force a quirk out of me. Todoroki put a hand on his shoulder. He remembered the intense training his father had put him through when he had discovered his quirk. Oftentimes, it would get to the point of him being physically sick. One day, Mom had enough of him hurting me. She threatened to call the police on him. The only reason she hadn't before was because he had threatened to hurt me. He could breathe fire, so it wouldn't have been hard to kill me by mistake. Dad. Midoriya went quiet. Dad got really angry. Almost burned the house down. He looked at Todoroki. If I'm being honest, ever since then, I've always been a little afraid of fire quirks. Todoroki looked at his left hand in horror. God, then the sports festival. Midoriya quickly shook his hands and head. I know what you're thinking, but don't. If anything, you helped me get rid of my fear of fire. He smiled bitterly. Even when I was afraid of it, I still hoped that if I was ever going to get a quirk, I would settle for breathing fire. I would push myself for hours, hoping. He went silent, but this time he didn't continue. Todoroki put a careful hand on his shoulder. Midoriya, you don't have to finish. Just because I told you about my scar doesn't mean I told you everything. So you don't have to, Todoroki. I have to get past this. He started shaking, tears falling from his face, head bent to the ground. If I don't do this now, then I'll never really get over it. It's the same logic as you being reluctant to use your firepower. You rejected it, like I'm rejecting my memories of him. He looked up at Todoroki, and he couldn't help feeling intense pride in his friend. I helped you overcome that. I have to do this for myself. Todoroki hesitated. He's right, but it's hurting him to talk about it. He smiled. If it will help, then the least I can do is listen. Midoriya took a deep breath in and continued. I was hoping that if I developed a quirk, then Dad would come back, and everything would go back to the way it was. He wiped his eyes and looked back at the door. The sound of laughter and music was almost deafeningly loud in the silence. The smile quickly dropped from Todoroki's face. Oh, Midoriya, I could tell Mom wasn't happy about it. She loved him, she really did. It took every last ounce of strength she had to make him leave. And I know that she did it because she loves me. But sometimes I still feel like it's my fault that she isn't as happy as she once was, and that I'm the reason she never tried to remarry. Midoriya looked at this scarred hands in shame. Nobody would want to marry someone with a quirkless son. I can't stop this awful feeling that I've been holding her back all these years. Midoriya put a hand against the door. The reason why I'm not in there with everyone is... He swallowed. Today's the anniversary of the day he left. Todoroki pulled him into a tentative hug, trying to hold back his own tears. I'm so sorry, Midoriya, he whispered. I didn't know. I never thought that you could have gone through that. Midoriya wrapped his arms tightly around Todoroki's, burying his head in his shirt. He let out something between a sob and a laugh. Don't be sorry, Todoroki. You had it way worse than... Anger filled Todoroki, though it wasn't directed at his friend. That doesn't invalidate your own experiences, Midoriya. Suffering isn't a competition. They sat in silence for a moment, both boys trying and failing to hold back tears. Todoroki took a deep, shaky breath. I have nightmares about the training camp too. Todoroki felt more than heard Deku's gasp. But why? You didn't do anything. Todoroki started shaking as the memories came back to him. Reaching out for Bakugo's orb. 𝗬𝗲𝗍's hand appearing out of nowhere. Stumbling to the ground. He had been too late. He hadn't been able to save someone right in front of him. The portal closing. Midoriya screaming for Bakugo, agony effling his voice. Todoroki gripped Midoriya's shirt tighter. That's exactly my point. He was right there, and... He swallowed back a sob. And I couldn't save him. Midoriya drew a breath to speak, but Todoroki interrupted him. And don't even say that you didn't save him either. You couldn't even walk. There wasn't a way for you to save him. But I was. I ran, and I was too slow, too weak. Midoriya pulled away from him slowly, tears streaming down his face. Why, you're not weak, Todoroki. Not by a long shot. You're one of the strongest people I know, with or without your quirk. He laughs. God, we're both a mess. Let's agree that it wasn't our fault. It was the villains. His face hardened. And we're gonna send them straight to hell. Todoroki chuckled lightly. Such strong words for such a tiny person. He immediately went on the defensive as Midoriya launched himself at Todoroki. I am not small, you take that back. Todoroki swatted his hand away from his face. Oh yeah, make me. The two boys scuffled on the steps, eventually rolling off and landing with a thud. Todoroki let out an unnatural screech as his funny bone hit the pavement. Pain, 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 pain. Mother of all things, what the fuck? Deku howled with laughter, slapping Todoroki's red hair lightly. That's what you get for calling me small. Todoroki scowled, and was about to yell when light filled the outside. They looked over and saw Ida standing in the doorway. I thought I heard something, he said triumphantly. Now hurry up inside. It's almost curfew and Midoriya here has already broken it once. Todoroki winced, clutching his elbow dramatically. Ida immediately noticed, and lent him his support. What happened to you? How were you injured? Midoriya laughed. He called me small and the universe punched him. Todoroki's eye twitched. Midoriya, I'm gonna kill you. The green-haired boy let out a screech of terror as he booked it inside. Todoroki chased after him, laughing. He didn't care that Ida was behind him, yelling at him to not run. or that his classmates were giving him weird but happy looks. He only smiled and laughed as the other classmates chose sides and started a pillow fight. The nightmares would never be forgotten, and they wouldn't fade away quickly. But for tonight at least, they would dream of a pure happiness that could only be felt in the arms of a friend. Todoroki just wished that the peace could have lasted. Midoriya admired his All Might figures in his room. It had taken years to collect them, and even now he didn't have all of them. He was about to take one off the shelf when the sweet smell of his mother's cooking flooded his nose, confusing him. I don't live at home anymore. He opened his bedroom door and headed for the elevator. He didn't hear anything from his doormates, which was odd. He usually always heard a soft humming from Aoyama's room. He shrugged, assuming he was downstairs with the others. He pushed the button for the elevator. After a few moments it opened. Midoriya screamed and leapt back in terror as he saw the elevator walls. They were dripping in blood, and to his horror, Ida lay on the ground. Blood pooled around his arms and legs. His boosters were broken and shattered. Midoriya rushed forward, almost gagging at the scent of metallic blood. He knelt down inside the elevator next to his friend. Ida, are you okay? What happened to you? He put a finger to Ida's neck, praying for a pulse. He screamed in horror as Ida dissolved into dust underneath his touch. He frantically tried to back out of the elevator to go get help, but his back was met with the doors. He curled up into a ball and tried to ignore the smell and sound of blood pooling around his feet and dripping from the walls. What the hell is happening? What the hell is happening? Midoriya wanted to cry as he smelled the sweet scent of his mother's cooking mixing in with the scent of blood. The moment the elevator doors opened, he bolted out of the elevator. He bolted for the kitchen, where the smell of his mom's cooking was coming from. Guys, help, Ida is... He skidded to a halt and let out a shout of surprise. Kaken was being held by the throat of All for One, terror and anger in his eyes. Midoriya's eyes widened in horror. Kaken. He looked to his side and saw All Might on his knees, blood dripping from his mouth. His mentor looked at him angrily. Why the hell weren't you here to help me, Midoriya? Some successor you are. Midoriya started shaking, more tears threatening to fall down his face. All Might, I didn't know Ida is I need. Midoriya whipped around as he heard a familiar scream of terror. Kota. What's he doing here? Muscular had him by the shirt, cackling. Before Midoriya could react, Muscular ran forward and punched All Might in the back, sending him flying towards All for One. Midoriya stood frozen to the ground in horror as Muscular gripped Kota tighter, and All Might landed at All for One's feet. Midoriya jerked himself into motion and yanked Kota away from Muscular, holding him close. Kota, everything will be all right. Everything will be okay. It'll be fine. Kota curled up in his arms, crying. They're gonna kill us all. Everyone is gonna be gone because nobody can protect them. Midoriya shook his head, a frail smile forming on his face. Kota, that's not true. He stopped as he felt 4 cold fingers wrapped around his throat. Fear flooded Midoriya as Kota screamed. Hello, Midoriya. Midoriya turned his head slowly and saw Shigaraki's glowing red eyes, burning with a horrible glee. Midoriya started to tremble. How did you don't deserve one for all. Midoriya froze. How do you know? It should have been given to that Bakugo brat. Shigaraki's eyes brightened. Or even to me, he laughed, a sickening sound. Nevertheless, you should have never been given such power. You don't deserve it. Before Midoriya has the chance to respond, ice engulfs Shigaraki. Todoroki. He's okay. Midoriya clawed his way out of Shigaraki's cold hands and was about to tell Kota to run when he dissolved into dust under his arms. Midoriya fell to his knees and wailed. He looked up at Todoroki in despair. Todoroki, what did I do to deserve this? We're all dead thanks to you. Midoriya stopped ranting. He took a step back in horror. What? Todoroki's eyes burned. We're all dead thanks to you. You aren't a hero. You're pathetic. He took a step towards Midoriya, but before he could put another foot down, fire completely engulfed him. Midoriya reached a hand out to save his friend. He has to be able to save someone. But just as he reached his hand through the flames, Todoroki turned into ash. More and more tears fell down Midoriya's face. He buried his head in his hands and wailed, letting out sob after sob. Everyone. I'm so sorry. I failed. He looked at the spot where Todoroki had just been and saw All Might kneeling on the ground. All Might. We have to save them. We have to. They're my friends. All Might turned his head in shame. I failed as a hero. Smoke engulfed him as he transformed back into his weak form. I failed as a teacher. Midoriya was about to cry into his mentor when All Might's voice changed to something deeper, darker. A familiar voice, one that had haunted him since he was 4 years old. Look around, Midoriya. You have failed. They were right in front of you, and you did nothing. Midoriya froze and looked around at his surroundings at the sound of his father's voice. He let out a scream as he saw everyone lying on the floor. Blood pooled around his friends, his family. Mr. Aizawa, Uraraka, Kaken. No. All of your friends and teachers are dead, my son. Midoriya faced his father, who had a familiar, sickening grin on his face. It's all your fault, my boy. You have nothing. Nobody. You have failed. Midoriya let out a sob of anguish as his father faded away, and ignored the rising tide of blood, until it grabbed him and pulled him into the depth. He felt blood fill his mouth, ears, everything. Midoriya? He looked around. Who was left to call him? Midoriya. Midoriya. He let out a soft, wet cry. Help. Midoriya. Midoriya jerked awake with a scream, jolting up on his bed. He grabbed his hair and tugged in panic, the smell of blood slowly fading away. But the scent of his mother's cooking remained. He continued to scream as he felt hands touching him, and he tried to run away. Midoriya tripped all over his blankets and fell off of his bed and onto the hard floor with a thud. Blankets surrounded him, and he pulled it closer to him in a frail attempt to hide from the nightmare. He heard another soft thud as someone landed on the floor next to him and pulled him close. Midoriya panicked and frantically tried to get away, but to no avail. Midoriya, it's okay, everything's okay, it's just me, it was just a dream, everything is okay, you're okay. The voice was familiar, soft, but tinged with fear. It's all right, Midoriya, you're okay. Midoriya looked up in fear and instead of seeing his father's eyes, only saw gray and blue, teeming in concern. Todoroki was in his pajamas and looked tired and worried. There was no blood, no fire, and he didn't appear to be hurt. Midoriya let out a sob and flung himself into Todoroki, wailing. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I failed, I'm sorry, Todoroki. Todoroki flinched, and slowly and slightly awkwardly wrapped his arms around Midoriya. You have nothing to be sorry for, it's okay. Just breathe. In and out. In, out. Todoroki ran his fingers through Midoriya's hair, and Midoriya started to calm down. It's just like when Mom used to do it. Midoriya buried his face into Todoroki's shirt and tried to breathe, letting out shaky breaths and small sobs. It felt so real. I couldn't save anyone, Midoriya hiccuped. Everyone WWS dying, dead. It was all my fault. I couldn't save anyone. I was helpless. Midoriya barely managed to stop himself from saying, I don't deserve one for all through his panic. No, I can't. Calm down, nobody else can know. It's your fault, Kaken knows too. It was just a dream. It was just a dream. Calm down before you slip up. I don't deserve to be called a hero, he said after a small pause. He felt Todoroki shake his head. That's not true, and you know it, Midoriya. We've talked about this, remember? Of course you deserve to be a hero. One nightmare doesn't change that. Midoriya couldn't stop another sob from escaping and wailed once more into Todoroki's shirt. I'm so sorry. I'm pathetic. Letting a dream get the best of me. Midoriya quieted as Todoroki shushed him and rubbed comforting circles on his back. It's not your fault, Midoriya. Everyone has nightmares sometimes. It's like we discussed last week. Just take deep breaths, in and out slowly. Midoriya leaned away from Todoroki, trying to take control of his breathing. He noticed that his room is almost completely dark, save for the moonlight filtering in through his window. What? What time is it? How long before we have to be up for school? Todoroki shrugged and looked at Midoriya's alarm clock, which was just out of range of Midoriya's own vision. It's 2:37 am. Midoriya sighed. Damn it. He looked at Todoroki, who gave him a weak smile at Midoriya's frustration. Sorry I woke you up, Todoroki. Midoriya froze the moment those words left his mouth. Wait. He whipped his head around his room in panic, trying to see if anyone else was there. You're on the 5th floor. How did you hear me and nobody else did? Realization dawned on Midoriya. Oh no. How many people did I wake up? Todoroki nodded to the door. It's okay, guys, you can come in now. Midoriya's fine, I promise. Midoriya groaned as Takoyami, Aoyama, Jiro, Ida, Kota, Kirishima, 𝐬𝐬 and Shoji entered his room. Guys, holy crap Midoriya, are you okay? Kirishima asked, kneeling down next to him and Todoroki. You were really loud, and you sounded really scared. What happened? Midoriya looked at Todoroki pleadingly. Todoroki sighed and continued to run his fingers through Midoriya's hair. He had a nightmare, a bad one by the looks of it. It probably triggered a panic attack, why I asked you to let me handle it. Thank you for listening. I know it must have been hard. Kirishima pulled Midoriya into a hug, taking him slightly away from Todoroki. Bro, I'm so sorry. But don't feel bad about it, okay? Everyone has nightmares, God knows I do. You're not any less of a man because of it. 𝐬𝐬 nodded, standing near the door by a shaking Kota. We honestly thought someone was attacking the dorms. You're lucky Mr. Aizawa wasn't here. Otherwise the entire building would have been put on lockdown. Midoriya blushed, and Todoroki gave 𝐬𝐬 a hard stare. Mr. Aizawa had been super busy with patrols lately, so he wasn't here tonight, and he wouldn't be for another 3 or 4 days. 𝐬𝐬 would have been right. Iida took a knee next to Kirishima. Everyone should stand back a little. Give him some breathing room. Midoriya smiled weakly as 𝐬𝐬 rolled his eyes and muttered something about hypocrites before Iida took his attention. Are you sure you're all right? You fell off of your bed. Does anything hurt? Did you hit your head? Do we need to take you to recovery, girl? Aoyama put his hands on Iida's shoulders. Mon Amy, maybe we should wait until morning to pester Midoriya. He seems exhausted. Pauvre Midoriya. Aoyama gave Midoriya a small smile. Ami, we will leave now. Try and get some rest, please. Iida turned his head in protest, but Jiro interrupted him. Aoyama's right, Iida. It's best we get back to bed. Midoriya buried his head into Todoroki again, ignoring his grunt of surprise. How many others are awake because of me? He asked, voice muffled. This is so embarrassing. Kirishima shrugged. The others are pretty heavy sleepers, and considering the alarms haven't gone off, yet I'm assuming it's just us. Jiro shook her head. No, I heard Bakugo in the stairwell. I didn't have time to check it out though. She shook her head. Honestly, I know he hates you and everything, but if he hears screaming, don't you think he should come check it out? Kirishima seemed oddly taken aback by that, while 𝐬𝐬 nodded in agreement. He's a total jerk. He looked at Midoriya, who was unconsciously hiding in Todoroki. Are you going to be okay for now? Because we have a test tomorrow in English, and we all need rest. He raised his hands in defense as Jiro shot him a glare. I'm not trying to be mean, Midoriya nodded, and Todoroki faced the others. He'll be all right, but just to be safe I'll stay with him tonight. Midoriya didn't try to argue. It's still embarrassing. Shoji nodded, one of his tentacle mouths speaking. He's obviously doing better. He shot Midoriya a hard stare. But he'll talk to us later. He patted Kota, who was shaking slightly still, on his shoulder. He's all right. There's no need to worry. Midoriya stood up, blushing. Thanks for worrying about me. It means a lot, and I'm really sore. Iida put his hands on his shoulders, smiling. You have no need to apologize, Midoriya. Everybody has nightmares sometimes. You should be concerning yourself with getting rest tonight. Iida turned around briskly and motioned for the rest to follow. Shoji does have a point, however. We will be talking about this later, and we will take measures to make sure you don't suffer alone. Midoriya was about to thank them and apologize when he heard hard footsteps. Oh lordy, here we go. 𝐾𝐦 shoved his way past Iida Kota, who flinched. Why the hell am I being woken up at 2:30 in the fucking morning on a school night? He looked around, and his eyes landed on Midoriya, leaning into Todoroki. And why the hell are the rest of you up? Kirishima put a stern hand on 𝐾𝐦's shoulder. Dude, calm down. Now's really not the time to pull a Bakugo. Besides, it's already being taken care of. Let's just… 𝐾𝐦 glared at him. And just what the hell is pulling a Bakugo? You trying to pick a fight, shitty hair? And don't tell me what to do. Midoriya leaned his head into Todoroki's back as he moved in front of him in a protective position. Bakugo, it is late. We apologize for waking you up, but I think it's best that you leave now. 𝐾𝐦 scoffed. That doesn't explain why I was woken up. We have a test tomorrow, and if you guys want to get a good score, we should all be asleep. Iida moved to stand next to Todoroki. Midoriya has a nightmare, okay? Are you happy now? Or are you going to be a dick and not let it go? 𝐾𝐦's face immediately changed for a split second, and Midoriya saw a hint of regret in there before it changed back. He turned his head back on Midoriya, whipping his shoulder away from Kirishima, who looked hurt. Whatever. I'm going back to bed. He made eye contact with Midoriya, who flinched. If it happens again, I'll kick your ass. As he walked out of the bedroom, he muttered a good night to Kirishima, who sighed in defeat before following him. Ida moved his hands in anger. Honestly, 𝗏𝑘𝑢𝐬 is unbelievable. I am incredibly sorry about that, Midoriya. Midoriya sighed, exhaustion kicking in. It's fine. I really just want to go to sleep. Ida nodded. Of course. Ida gently hustled everyone out of the room, and Midoriya waved meekly as everyone said goodnight and headed to their dorm rooms. Todoroki stayed behind. I can sleep on the floor if you want the bed to yourself, Midoriya, he said. Midoriya shook his head. No, it's fine. I usually don't take up that much space on my bed anyway. So if you want to sleep on my bed, you can, Midoriya said. I hope he doesn't kick in his sleep. Todoroki shrugged. All right, he said tiredly. Can I take the wall side? Midoriya nodded, and clambered onto his bed and padded next to him. He gave his friend a tired smile at his hesitation. I promise I don't kick in my sleep. Todoroki shook his head. No, it's not that, I just... Todoroki looked out the window. I haven't really slept with someone else since I was 3. My father wouldn't let me sleep with my siblings or mother. Midoriya frowned. Your dad's even more of an asshole than I thought. Todoroki chuckled. Well, you're not wrong, he said as he hopped over Midoriya. I'm not a kicker either, I think. Midoriya smiled and moved his second pillow over to Todoroki as he laid down next to Midoriya. Thank you, Todoroki. It means a lot that you don't want me to be alone. Todoroki nodded, his breathing already deeper. He must be exhausted thanks to me. It's no problem, Midoriya. You're my friend, and needed someone to be there for you. I just happened to be the one who knew how to handle it best. Midoriya looked out his window. Good night, Todoroki. He smiled as he heard a quiet "G night, Midoriya." Midoriya wrapped his arms around his legs and sighed. God, I can't believe I did that. I disturbed my friends and made them worry about me. And that's the last thing I wanted. It wasn't until he was just about to fall asleep did he realize that he had smelled his mother's cooking even after he had woken up. Bakugo hated Deku. It was just as much of a fact as 2 + 2 = 4 was. He was annoying, loud, tried too hard, and he was quirkless, which made him weak. Well, he was quirkless until All Might decided that Deku was the chosen one and gave him his power, one for all. Deku had been an idiot and had accidentally dropped hints about what was going on with him on multiple occasions, and if he was stupid enough to let Bakugo know, he was stupid enough to let villains know too. Bakugo yawned, his frustration already building for the day. Deku had decided to have yet another night of nightmare-induced screaming. It was the 3rd time in the past week, and continuously being woken up because of that idiot was getting on Bakugo's nerves. He wasn't the only one being woken up, but he was the only one who was getting annoyed by it. Everyone was worried for the idiot. He struggled to hold back a groan of frustration. He understood why Deku was having nightmares. It was only a few days after the anniversary of when his dad had been thrown behind bars. But that didn't excuse the fact that everyone else was struggling, because Deku couldn't get over his irrational fear of his father, who had been behind bars for 10 years. Kirishima had seriously struggled on the English test, the first time it happened, and barely passed with a B because he was too tired to concentrate on what Bakugo and Present Mic had taught him. He had also fallen asleep in class twice because he was too worried about Midoriya needing him and staying awake all night because of it. Bakugo was jerked from his thoughts as Kaminari bumped into him on the step. Watch where you're going, Pikachu, he yelled. Kaminari backed up, hands raised in defeat. Sorry, geez, he muttered. No need to be so rude about it. I didn't mean to. Shut up and go away before I kick your ass to America, Bakugo growled. He ignored Kirishima's sigh of defeat. Kirishima put his hand on Bakugo's shoulder. Take it easy, man. I know you don't really like mornings, but it was an accident, he said calmly. No need to pick a fight with Kaminari. Or anyone, really. Everyone's already on edge. There's no need to make it worse, Bakugo scowled. Not my fault he's too blind to watch where he's going, he muttered. And it's also not my fault that those losers are annoying. Or that nobody's slept much because Deku can't fucking sleep like a normal person. Kirishima frowned. Can't you just try being a little nicer? He asked. He continued to follow Bakugo after the blonde shoved his hand off of his arm and walked slightly faster. I'm just saying, Bakugo, a little kindness goes a long way. And you know that it's not Midoriya's fault that he's having nightmares. After what he went through trying to save you and 𝐽𝐻𝐸, I would think he'd be crazy if he didn't have nightmares. Bakugo scoffed. Only weaklings like him wake up screaming every night because they can't handle a simple dream, he said angrily, hitting Kirishima upside the head. Obviously, thanks to his hardening quirk, it didn't really have an effect. Deku's been interrupting everyone's sleep, including yours. And with your grades, you need to be better rested so you can actually keep some of the stuff we teach you in your head. Kirishima gasped dramatically. How dare you say that? My grades are perfectly fine, thank you very much. I even have an A in history, he said proudly. And it's not like he wants everyone to stay up to help him. It would just feel wrong if we sat by and did nothing. Bakugo rolled his eyes and continued walking. He should be able to handle having a few bad dreams every once in a while, he said sharply. Everyone in Class 1A who had helped Deku the first time didn't do very well on the English test the next day because they hadn't been able to fall back asleep. I would have gotten a perfect score if I hadn't been so damn tired. The second night, almost everyone in the dorms had woken up and had all volunteered to stay in Deku's room. Except Bakugo, of course, he couldn't care less. And just like before, they had all been less functional the next day. Bakugo kicked a rock, sending it flying down the sidewalk. He didn't care that Deku was having nightmares. It wasn't like he was the only one who had gone through scary shit. For fuck's sake, Bakugo had been kidnapped, and he was handling it better than that whiny loser. And what really ticked him off was that Deku didn't even tell the others why he was even having nightmares, and had only told 𝐸 and Four Eyes what was really going on. The only reason why Bakugo knew that was because Four Eyes had decided to call a class meeting to which he had unwillingly attended thanks to Kirishima to discuss it, only saying that Deku didn't feel comfortable sharing, and that it was personal. Everyone else had offered him their unconditional support. Morons. Bakugo jolted slightly as Kirishima said his name loudly. He whipped his head at his classmate. What? Kirishima chuckled. You were muttering, he said, kind of like Midoriya does sometimes. Bakugo hit him on the head again, wishing that just for once he could knock some sense into him through violence. I'm nothing like that green-haired loser, Bakugo shouted. I'm way stronger than him, he's pathetic. Kirishima put his hands up in surrender. I never said anything like that. I just think that you two have more in common than you think, he said with a smile. Bakugo rolled his eyes. The only things we have in common are where we grew up and what class we're in. That's it. But you both have eyes. Shut up. And noses. Do you want to fucking die, smartass? Bakugo asked, swatting Kirishima again. At least I'm not weak enough to have nightmares, or let personal issues affect my classmates and my work. Bakugo growled under his breath as Kirishima shrugged and ran off ahead as Pinky called him over. Fucking finally. He frowned and looked back towards the ground. Well, I wasn't wrong. I'm not weak enough to let my own personal issues affect others. He looked back up at Kirishima, who was smiling and laughing with the pink chick. But I'd be lying if I said that nightmares aren't one of my few weaknesses. Bakugo looked over at his alarm with a groan. 12:30 p.m. Shit. He sat up in his bed and rubbed his eyes. He hadn't been able to fall asleep yet, which was rather odd and annoying. Usually he was out at 9 p.m., but for some reason sleep was evading him. It was becoming more and more obvious that he wouldn't be able to go to sleep. Might as well head to the kitchen. Bakugo half-hopped, half-slid off of his bed and stretched, feeling the blood flow through him. At least my foot didn't fall asleep. That'd fucking suck. Bakugo quietly headed for the elevator, because he was on the 4th floor, and would rather die than take the stairs just to grab a glass of water. He was tempted to wake up Kirishima, but decided against it. The idiot has been getting less sleep than I do. He needs it. As Bakugo pressed the elevator button, he realized he probably wouldn't be alone downstairs. There was usually 1 or 2 people up studying or something, even at this hour. If they try to talk to me, they're dead. Bakugo stepped into the elevator as the doors opened and immediately wished he had worn socks or slippers. The elevator was always cold, probably because of icy hot, and it sucked. Bakugo wiggled his toes as the elevator went down, trying to keep them warm. He stumbled as the elevator came to a grinding halt, and the lights turned off. Fuck, he exclaimed. Yo, why the hell did the elevator stop? Idiots, he shouted. It's fucking cold, make the elevator work again. Bakugo groaned in frustration. Fucking Pikachu probably made the power go out again. Pikachu, so help me if you don't make the power come back on right now. Not even Mr. Aizawa can save you. Hello? Can any one of you fucks hear me? Bakugo groaned and slid down the side of the elevator wall. It wasn't likely that anybody could hear him considering the elevator was practically soundproof. And if Pikachu fell asleep downstairs or decided to take the stairs for once, it was likely that he would be here until morning. I can't even try and fall asleep, because it's so damn cold. Bakugo rested his arms and head on his legs and sighed. Maybe Pikachu will realize what he did and manage to fix it. This is where those who are sensitive and do not feel comfortable reading abuse can safely stop reading until my next mark. Pikachu is fucking gonna die in the morning. Bakugo had given up trying to shout for help within 5 minutes of getting trapped. He knew nobody would hear him. It had already been about 2 hours according to Bakugo's estimate. And that was 2 hours too long to be stuck in a freezing cold elevator. So when fucking Deku screams in terror, there aren't enough people to come help. But when I'm trapped in a freezing elevator, there isn't a damn person in sight. I hate him. He also hated himself for feeling sympathy for Deku. He understood that this was a harder time of year for him, especially considering all he'd been through with his dad. Bakugo tried not to wince as the memory of Deku's dad came to his mind. At first he had come across as super cool, and had been one of Bakugo's biggest supporters of his quirk, and constantly praised Bakugo, and told him he was the best. And for a long time everybody thought he was a really cool guy. But Bakugo had seen firsthand the way he acted behind closed doors, especially towards his family. He winced as the memory unfolded unwillingly in his mind. It had been one of the first and last times that Bakugo had ever slept over at Deku's house. He had been 6, Deku had been 5. Bakugo's parents had gone out of town, and had entrusted him to the midwarriors. The two had been sleeping peacefully when they had been dragged out of bed by Deku's dad, who was extremely excited that Deku was going to get his quirk that night thanks to his training, and wanted Bakugo to be there. Bakugo knew instantly that something was wrong based off of the terrified expression Deku had, and a giant red mark on Aunt Midoriya's tear-stained face. She had begged Deku's dad to not do it. "The boys are trying to sleep. Please just stop," Deku's dad snapped. "Quiet, woman. Don't you want our son to get a quirk?" He turned to Bakugo, who had moved in front of Deku protectively. "If he's too weak to protect himself, then I guess I'll just have to protect him. My son will get a quirk, one almost as cool as yours, young Kakin. Hisashi, please, let the boys." Bakugo had leapt back in terror as Uncle Midoriya had shot fire from his mouth straight at his wife, burning her leg. Bakugo grabbed Deku's hand to stop him from running over to his mother as she screamed in pain. "Don't be stupid, Deku. Stay back." As much as Bakugo hated Deku, Aunt Midoriya had always been kind to him, and treated him well. Sparks erupted from Bakugo's small hands. Hey, leave her alone and fight me instead," he shouted. You jerk." Deku's eyes widened in horror. "And no, Kakin. Please, don't fight him. He didn't mean it. He never does. He just wants me to get a quirk, that's all. Please don't hurt him." Bakugo ignored Deku's cries as his dad faced the boys. "Young Kakin," he said with a crazed smile. "As powerful as your quirk is, you're just a boy. If we were to fight, you would die immediately. And I don't think your mother would be too happy with me if I killed a future hero." Bakugo shouted in defiance and let loose a larger explosion, crying out as his muscles overworked themselves. He saw a flash of green out of the corner of his vision, but before he could stop the blow aimed towards Uncle Midoriya, Deku leapt in front of him and was shot straight into the other wall. Bakugo stood in horror as Aunt Midoriya let out a gut-wrenching scream of anger and fear as her son slammed against the wall with a sickening thud. Bakugo ran past Deku's dad as he laughed, and Bakugo knelt down next to him. Deku, I knew you were stupid, but..." He stopped as Deku looked at him, tears in his eyes and blood running down the side of his face. He looked at Bakugo with such sadness in his eyes, and it filled Bakugo with rage. "Kakin, he doesn't want to hurt us," he said, voice shaking. "Daddy doesn't want to hurt us, he just gets angry. He loves us. Don't hurt him, Kakin." Bakugo shook his head. "You're an idiot if you think he loves you." "This," Aunt Midoriya shouted at Deku's dad. "You get away from them, Hisashi. Or so help me God, I'll call the police. Get out of this house and never come back." Her voice cracked and was filled with sorrow. "Please, Hisashi. Just leave us alone," Uncle Midoriya frowned. "Inko, my love, my life. I just want our son to grow up big and strong. And if I need to hurt him a little for him to develop a quirk like 𝐀𝐦, then I will." His voice grew louder, and 𝗵𝘃𝐻 stood protectively in front of a crying Deku. "I'm the only one in this house who is willing to make sacrifices for this family. You owe me everything." His eyes were practically white with rage, and Deku whimpered behind 𝗵𝘃𝐻 as Uncle Midoriya continued to shout. "All I want is a son who isn't completely worthless." Uncle Midoriya turned to 𝗵𝘃𝐻, who tensed. "Someone," Uncle Midoriya said in a soft voice, "like 𝐀𝐭." 𝗵𝘃𝐻 backed up against Deku as Uncle Midoriya slowly walked towards him. "Don't you want to live with us, 𝐀𝐭? We could take you far away and make you the best. Better than 𝗓𝗫𝗏. Maybe even better than All Might himself. I know how much you admire him, so why not?" He was interrupted by the sound of a phone ring. He whipped his head around and saw his wife with the phone to her ear. "Why, you little—" Aunt Midoriya made eye contact with 𝗵𝘃𝐻, who was frozen in terror. "Run, boys. Go and don't look back. Get help." 𝗵𝘃𝐻 grabbed Deku's hand and made a run for the exit as Deku's dad shot fire at Aunt Midoriya. Deku screamed in fear as his mother dodged and raised a pan in front of her to protect her face. But the kitchen was set ablaze. "Mama!" 𝗵𝘃𝐻 opened the door and ran. "Come on, Deku. We gotta go. She'll be fine," 𝗵𝘃𝐻 shouted. His heart was pounding, and the only thought on his mind was to get out. Get out, escape, go. 𝗵𝘃𝐻 practically threw Deku down the stairs. "Keep running. Heroes will be here soon. We gotta go." He had to leap onto Deku as the green-haired idiot tried to run back up the stairs. But 𝐀𝐭, Mommy's still. Do you want to die, you idiot? She'll be fine. We just gotta. He was cut off as a blast of flame burned through the door to Deku's apartment. "Run, you idiot." Deku almost made it past 𝗵𝘃𝐻 to run for his mother when she appeared and started running down the stairs, phone to her ear and favoring her left leg. "Boys, don't stop running. Go." 𝗵𝘃𝐻 shoved Deku in front of him. "You heard her. Go." 𝗵𝘃𝐻 could already hear the sirens in the distance, coming to save them. "Hurry, Aunt Midoriya, are you okay? Did he hurt you? I'm gonna kill him." Aunt Midoriya shook her head and scooped Deku into her arms, slowing down so that she could keep an eye on 𝗵𝘃𝐻. I'm fine. Oh, 𝐀𝐭, I'm so sorry about all of this." 𝗵𝘃𝐻 didn't get a chance to respond as police cars and fire trucks pulled into the narrow parking lot, and a bunch of people came rushing towards them. Aunt Midoriya had pulled 𝗵𝘃𝐻 into a hug and thanked him for trying to save Deku. It is now safe to read again. The rest of it was just a blur to 𝗵𝘃𝐻. He remembered sitting on a cool fire truck and seeing Aunt Midoriya and Deku getting treated for their injuries, and seeing Deku's dad being taken away in handcuffs. He wasn't present for Deku's dad's trial, but his parents were. Hisashi Midoriya was sentenced to 50 years in prison, which 𝗵𝘃𝐻 was thankful for. He had only slept over once after that, several years later. And even now, he can see the effect of his abuse. Aunt Midoriya has a faded scar from where she was burned, and Deku had always been a lot quieter and less ready to defend himself. 𝗵𝘃𝐻 had continued to despise Deku, and didn't care about him. He was pathetic to let his dad treat him and his mother like that, but he understood why he hadn't done anything. 𝗵𝘃𝐻 was jolted from his thoughts as the elevator started to move again. He jumped to his feet and got ready to beat the hell of whoever was outside of the door. The moment the door opened, he bolted out of the elevator, but there wasn't anybody in sight. He looked around and growled, "Pikachu is so fucking dead." But as he climbed back into bed about 10 minutes later, after climbing the stairs, he realized he hadn't seen any trace of Kaminari downstairs at all. Not even a mess of food wrappers and snacks that was usually there after he had snacked. Meaning that it wasn't likely Kaminari could have been the one who caused the elevator to shut down. Kirishima's eyes widened in shock. "You were up past 11 last night?" The redhead snorted. "That's a first." 𝗵𝘃𝐻 rolled his eyes. "That wasn't what you were supposed to get from me telling you, shitty hair," he said tiredly. Kirishima shook his head. "Right, sorry. So, the elevator shut down. Are you sure that Kaminari wasn't downstairs and was messing around?" 𝗵𝘃𝐻 shrugged. "I have no idea," he admitted. But there was no sign of his usual mess anywhere. And he would have gotten someone up if he had caused the outage to fix it for him. So it's unlikely that he was the one who did it. The redhead rubbed his chin. "Well, do you think we should tell a teacher? If the elevator shuts down again, especially during an emergency, it could mean trouble. And if it really wasn't Kaminari, then what could have caused it?" 𝗵𝘃𝐻 nudged Kirishima. "It was probably nothing, dude. These things were built really fast. I wouldn't be surprised if more mistakes like this show up in the other dorm buildings. Just forget I told you, he muttered. Because the only reason why I did was so that you wouldn't be all gross and motherly, because I didn't get a good amount of sleep last night. I'm gonna kill whoever caused that. Bakugo bit back a grin as Kirishima put a hand to his chest dramatically. I am not gross and motherly, he said loudly. I am manly. Kirishima froze as Mina shouted, hey, from behind them. He whipped around awkwardly. And not that being motherly ain't manly, he stuttered. Being a mom is hard work. And, Bakugo smacked Kirishima upside the head. Just shut up before you hurt yourself, dude, he muttered. Fucking idiot. Kirishima sighed. Man, I can't do anything right today. First I put my shirt on backwards, almost use your toothbrush. He cut himself off as Bakugo glared at him. Almost, dude, calm down. And now I'm making fun of one of the hardest jobs on the planet. Bakugo looked at his classmate. That's not true. You can do stuff right. Kirishima brightened. Really? He asked. He grinned. Yeah, you can make an idiot of yourself in front of everyone perfectly, he said. Bakugo dodged as Kirishima tried to hit him, whining about how mean he was. Come on, dude, you left yourself wide open for that. Kirishima glared at the blonde. Shut up, Mr. Cranky, because he didn't get his beauty sleep, he muttered. Bakugo's fists exploded, and so did his temper. This dumbass is trying to pick a fight. You wanna fucking die, shitty hair, he yelled. Kirishima grinned and hardened his arms. It'd be a glorious death, he said proudly. But I doubt that you could actually hurt me. I mean, look at me, he said, brandishing his muscles. I'm a goddamn king like this, Bakugo sighed. You're so fucking lucky that I'm nice, shitty hair, he muttered. One day you're gonna piss off the wrong people. And then I'll have to be the one to save your ass before you get yourself killed. Kirishima smiled. Awa, you really do care. Hey, wanna team up when we're heroes? He asked. Ground Zero and Red Riot. Kick-ass crime-fighting partners. Bakugo hit Kirishima again. Moron. I don't need to team up with anyone in the future. I'm gonna be the strongest hero in the world. But at the rate you're going, I'm barely gonna get to actually fight anybody, because I'll be preventing you from going 6 feet under, Bakugo said proudly. Unless you keep pissing me off. Then you won't need to worry about villains killing you, he muttered. Kirishima laughed. Love you too, bro. No homo, he added, laughing. Bakugo rolled his eyes. Oh please, that hairstyle is so fucking gay. No homo, my ass. Did you study for? Get down. The world seemed to slow as Bakugo was shoved to the ground by Kirishima, red eyes wide with panic. As Bakugo hit the ground, a line of fire flew above his head, scorching the tips of his hair, heading straight for Kirishima's chest and torso. He couldn't get up in time to stop his friend getting a direct blast of fire. Kirishima screamed in pain as flames burned his chest, spreading over his shirt. He collapsed to the ground, rolling desperately, trying to get the flames out. Already his chest had a large burn, making Bakugo sick. Bakugo looked around, trying to find the source of the attacker. Whoever the hell you, Bakugo started to yell. He froze. Fire. He growled, explosions popping in his fists as his classmates raced to Kirishima's side. Ice hot. Bakugo tried to stand up again, but was pulled back down by Kirishima. The redhead was looking around frantically, face frozen in fear and pain, his torso covered in burns. Bakugo, don't stand up. Everybody needs to get down, he yelled. Bakugo knelt onto the ground along with surrounding classmates Mina, Shiro, Gyro, Asui, Kaminari, Sato, and Mainta. Mina held Kirishima close, tears forming at the edges of her eyes. It'll be okay, we'll get you to recovery, girl, she said frantically. Kaminari glared at Bakugo. What the hell happened? I know you get angry sometimes, but this, don't you fucking dare assume I did this, Pikachu, Bakugo snarled. One moment we were walking, and the next I was on the ground and Kirishima was on fire from ice hot. Asui looked to Bakugo in confusion. What? You think Todoroki did this? Bakugo crawled closer to Asui, refraining himself from grabbing her shirt and throwing her to their attacker. You idiot. Who else here has a fucking fire quirk? Shiro shook his head, eyes glued to Kirishima, who was now breathing heavily, eyes dull. That's not at all like something Todoroki would do. And we all know that he hates using his fire quirk. Shiro shuddered, probably remembering how he got his ass handed to him during the sports festival. Besides, Shiro continued, Todoroki and Midoriya went to talk to Present Mike about an assignment they had a question on, so it couldn't be him. And his quirk can't shoot a concentrated line like that anyway according to what I've seen him do. Well then, what the hell is going on? 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻 yelled. He looked to Kirishima, who was panting. How hot was that fire? Guilt pricked at 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻. I should have been more cautious. I should know better than anyone to always expect an attack. Hey shitty hair, did you see who it was? He asked. I'm gonna fucking kill them. 𝐸𝐸 got off of her knees, being careful to continue crouching. I'm gonna go get help, she said quietly. Everyone, be prepared to fight. I'll be back as soon as I can to join you. The remaining classmates formed a sort of defensive circle around Kirishima as Mina slid away, using her acid to move faster. Kaminari's quirk lightly surrounded him. 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻, do you have any idea who did it? He asked. 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻 shook his head. If it wasn't 𝐬𝐻𝐢, then I don't know. But so help me God, I'm gonna 𝐬𝐸𝐬 cut him off. You're not gonna do anything 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻, he warned. You didn't get your provisional license, meaning that once these bastards show their face, the only option you have is to get Kirishima out of here. You can't fight. 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻 clenched his fists. He's right. But it's bullshit. I was the one who was almost attacked. Again. Fine, he muttered. But why haven't those bastards attacked again? Asui nodded. It's kind of weird. I suggest we try making our way to the school. It'll be slow, but we have to try, she said quietly. If we stay here, they're bound to. 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻's attention was ripped from her as Kaminari and Mina screamed. Before 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻 could do anything about it, a giant hole appeared in the ground underneath half of his classmates. Asui used her tongue to save 𝐻𝐸𝐻, 𝐸𝐸𝐻, and J.I.R.O before she fell in as well, screaming in terror. 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻 lunged forward to try to grab Kirishima, who was slipping into the ever-growing hole. But as he reached his hand out, another shot of fire came towards him, hitting his hand. 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻 instinctively pulled it back, shouting in pain. I have to get Kirishima. He made another dive for his friend, and he was too late. The hole closed, leaving only 𝐻𝐸𝐻, 𝐸𝐸𝐻, J.I.R.O and 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻 above ground. 𝐻𝐸𝐻 wailed, burying her head in J.I.R.O's chest. 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻 stood up quickly, yanking a shocked 𝐸𝐸𝐻 to his feet. We gotta move, 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻 yelled, his voice cracking. Get to the school, now. J.I.R.O plugged her jack into the ground, listening. 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻 turned to her. We gotta go, I don't hear them, J.I.R.O said quietly, tears at the edges of her eyes. I can't hear them. Oh God, I can't hear them. 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻 dragged her and 𝐻𝐸𝐻 to their feet, his own throat closing in guilt and anger. We have to move. Go, he said, shoving them to the school. Don't stop running. He somehow made it to the front of the small group of students, his heart in his throat. Focus 𝐻𝐸𝐻. 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻 could have leapt for joy when he saw President Mike and Mr. Aizawa running towards them, with 𝐸𝐸𝐻 and goddammit, why is Deku here? He doesn't need to save me. Deku's face was white with horror. What the hell is his problem? We've got a situat, 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻 started to shout. He wasn't able to finish as another stream of fire nearly hit him in the face. He jumped backwards in order to dodge. Shit. Whipping his head around, he saw his classmates trying to dodge electrical attacks. They've got a hell of a group that's attacking us. Losers, 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻 called. Get to the teachers, 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻 landed on the ground, his forearms hurting from boosting him forward and legs ready to run. Mr. Aizawa and President Mike were calling out to them, telling them to get inside the school. I haven't seen Mr. Aizawa this pissed since 𝐡𝐸𝐻. He got ready to use his explosions to throw J.I.R.O closer to the school when suddenly there was no ground. 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻 started to fall, and he let out a breathless shout of surprise. Shit! The last thing he heard was Deku crying out for him before the world went dark. ~5~minutes~earlier Midoriya rubbed his ears, leaning against the wall outside of President Mike's classroom next to Todoroki. The scarred boy sighed. As much as I admire President Mike and his teaching methods, if he could just not shout for 2 minutes, that would be great, he said tiredly. He wasn't even using his quirk either. Midoriya laughed. It's his nature, he said. And at least we got some help for the assignment. He wiggled the sheet of papers in his hand, smiling. Todoroki nodded. That's true. How soon do you think Kaminari or Kirishima will be begging us for answers? He inquired. Midoriya pushed himself away from the wall, stretching. Probably before the end of the day if they don't ask Kaken first, he said, chuckling. They're not the best in his class. If they need help, I'd be glad to give it to them. Midoriya's pocket started buzzing, startling them. He took his phone out of his pocket, to be greeted by the sight of his mom calling him. He motioned for Todoroki to be quiet as he answered. Hey mom, what's Izuku? Oh thank God, you're all right, his mother cried. Midoriya did a double take. Yeah, I'm okay, he said slowly. Worry struck Midoriya like a baseball bat. Mom, what's going? Izuku, honey, I need you to stay in the school. No matter what you do, you have to stick by any pro hero you can. Whatever you do, Mom, Izuku said quickly, shooting Todoroki a worried look. Calm down, please. What's going on? He escaped Izuku. Last night, his mother whispered. He escaped from prison last night. Midoriya froze, horror rooting him to the ground. His heartbeat quickened, and fear was the only thing on his mind. No, he couldn't. He couldn't have. Mom, Midoriya said quietly. Please tell me you're talking about someone else, he said, his voice cracking dangerously. Please. His mom swallowed loudly, audible over the phone call. I'm sorry, honey. I have to go. I'm going to be staying with the Bakugos until he's found. We'll be safe. Heroes and the police are all around us making sure he doesn't come for me, she murmured. Please, Izuku, stay safe. Midoriya nodded, hanging up the phone. How did he? He looked at Todoroki, who was standing there, concern on his face. Todoroki, he escaped, Midoriya said, voice small. Todoroki stepped closer. Who escaped? What happened? My dad escaped from prison last night, Midoriya whispered. He escaped. Oh God. Midoriya felt himself swaying and fell to his knees. Immediately Todoroki was next to him, rubbing his shoulders in circles. Midoriya, I need you to calm down, he said calmly. The police and heroes will be looking for him. And you're at UA. He won't get you. I won't let that happen. Where will your mom be staying for now? Midoriya took a deep breath. Come on, focus. Calm down. He'll never get you, Izuku. Todoroki's right. I'm at UA, one of the most secure places in the world. His quirk doesn't allow for access to me. She'll be staying at 𝐻𝐿 place with his parents, he said quietly. When we were little, he wanted 𝐻𝐿. God no, Midoriya's world froze over. 𝐻𝐿 might not know. 𝐻𝐿's one of his targets. He stood up quickly, accidentally knocking over Todoroki in the process. 𝐻𝐿, he exclaimed. He ran down the hallway, ignoring Todoroki's calls for him to slow down. 𝐻𝐿's in trouble. He had to stop himself from falling down the stairs, instead using his quirk to bounce against the walls. I hope I don't get in trouble for leaving dents. Midoriya skidded to a stop as he saw Uraraka frantically talking to Mr. Aizawa. Uraraka, he called, running up to them. Where's 𝐻𝐿? It's important. Everyone's still out there. Kirishima got burned really badly. We don't know what's going on, she said, tears in her eyes. We gotta get out there before something happens and someone gets hurt. Midoriya grabbed Uraraka's, panic fueling him. What happened? Where's 𝐻𝐿? He yelled. He felt bad for scaring her. But damn it, I don't have time for this. He was pulled away by Todoroki, who looked to Mr. Aizawa. Mr. Aizawa, what's? Their teacher turned to them. Todoroki, stay inside. You aren't allowed to fight them. You didn't pass the exam, he said sternly. Midoriya briefly felt sorry for Todoroki. He wanted to help. Aizawa looked past the kids, and they all heard Present Mike running towards them. Hisashi, Uraraka, and Midoriya, come with me. Now. The three followed their teacher, running as fast as they could. Uraraka floated herself so that she could keep up. Midoriya looked to the brunette in fear. Uraraka, what's happening? She trembled. I don't know exactly. One moment we were all walking to class, and the next thing we knew, Kirishima was burning and Bakugo was on the ground. I went to get help, but Bakugo thinks Todoroki did it, which I know isn't true because he was with you. Midoriya almost stopped running. Be burned? He whispered to himself. Oh God, I was too late, Midoriya yelled. He sprinted ahead of the teachers, ignoring their orders to get behind them. No. He looked up from the ground, seeing Hagakure, Sero, Gyro, and thank God. 𝐻𝐿, he screamed. Bakugo looked to him in anger. We've got a 𝐶𝐸, 𝐻𝐿 started to shout, but dodged another fire attack. Midoriya paled. How is he here? Midoriya wasn't able to hear anything as he saw the ground beneath 𝐻𝐿 start to crack. No. 𝐻𝐿, he screamed. As 𝐻𝐿 fell into the now shrinking pit, Mr. Aizawa ran after him. Hisashi, protect the students, he yelled. I'll go get the rest. Present Mike ran after him. "Are you crazy?" he shouted. Shouta! Before anyone could do anything, Mr. Aizawa leapt into the hole, which promptly closed. The remaining students and President Mike stood around the school's entrance in shock. 𝐻𝐡𝐚𝐭 wailed, Gyro holding her close, her face pale. "What? What happened?" she whispered. Midoriya was frozen to the ground, tears at the edges of his eyes. "𝐻𝐡𝐴N's gone. Again. 𝐻𝐡𝐴N's gone. 𝐻𝐡𝐴N's gone." He dimly heard screaming as he fell to the ground. "I failed. Again. I'm no hero." It wasn't until Todoroki came out and held him did Midoriya realize that the screaming was his own. The students who had bore witness to the attack waited outside of Principal Nezu's office. All Might and President Mike had gone in there to talk to the principal, and they had been ordered to wait outside. Someone could have cut the tension with a butter knife. Everyone was so quiet. It didn't feel natural. They didn't believe it. They couldn't believe it. Just like that, their friends were just gone. Gyro rested her head on Uraraka's shoulder, feeling her do the same on her own head. She bit back another sob. It had all happened so fast, she wasn't even sure if it was real. One moment everything was fine. The next Kirishima was on the ground. People were being pulled underneath the ground, and Tsu had saved her. Gyro couldn't disguise the guilt that ran through her. She could have saved herself, but she didn't, and now she was heaven knows where with Bakugo, Sato, Kaminari, Mina and Mineta. Not to mention Kirishima, who last she had seen had a large burn blistering on his chest. Midoriya hadn't been able to calm down after he witnessed it. He'd been taken to a private room so that Todoroki could attempt to calm him down, but to no avail. He'd then been taken to the nurse's office so he could be supervised. Gyro didn't blame him. Twice now, he'd seen his childhood friend ripped away from him. President Mike had seemed so quiet. It had nearly sent Gyro into her own state of shock. He was never quiet, even when he wasn't using his quirk. But as he had dragged the rest of them inside the school to safety, he had spoken so softly that Gyro could barely hear him. Her heart twisted. "I always forget that President Mike and Mr. Aizawa are close. This must be killing him." Gyro, Uraraka, 𝐻𝐴N, Zero and Todoroki were told to wait out here until they had the chance to be interviewed. Barely anyone made a sound beside the occasional sniffle. Even Zero, who was usually so talkative, had been dead silent, burying his head against his knees. Gyro wanted to cry. Yeah, Todoroki rarely talked anyway, but his face. It was so full of pain and guilt that Gyro just wanted to get up and make him smile. Nobody can make him smile like Midoriya can. But Midoriya can barely function right now. 𝐻𝐴N was curling in on herself. When they'd first been brought into the school, she had been sobbing. It was her fault, she'd said between sobs. They had tried to comfort her, but it couldn't be done. Seeing her friends so upset made Gyro's stomach twist. This wasn't who they were. They were the heroes of Class 1A, who had fought and won against villains several times. The class that all but two had been given their provisional licenses. This isn't how it's supposed to be. But Gyro didn't have the strength in her to say it. Not after seeing the fear in Kaminari's eyes as he plummeted down a hole leading to who knew where. Not after Tsu sacrificed her own safety for hers. She couldn't. Nobody could. Everyone was jolted from their thoughts as they heard President Mike yell. It wasn't his usual happy yell, no. He sounded angry and scared. A moment later, they heard a loud thud as something fell over in the office, and the door slammed open. Mike stormed out of the room, barely giving the students another glance. Midnight took a few steps after him, but was pulled back by All Might. All Might buried his head in his hands for a moment, before standing and coming up to the students. "You guys," he said quietly, "we just need to ask a couple questions. Nothing too big." He looked over the group, and how scared they looked. "If you would rather do it together, then you may." He turned his gaze over to Todoroki. "However, young Todoroki, we ask that you go with Midnight to the dorms." He paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. "The others don't know what happened yet." Zero glared at him. "You mean you haven't told them yet, huh? You just put them on lockdown? Leaving them worried sick?" he asked. He shrugged off Uraraka's hand, standing up. "They don't have a goddamn idea, do they?" he shouted. "They don't know that half of their classmates, their friends, were whipped down a fucking rabbit hole by God knows who." Gyro stood up and walked over, gently taking his hand. "Zero," she pleaded quietly. "Please, don't." Zero slapped her hand away, hurt clear on his face. "They were taken from us. Again. He turned and looked at All Might and 𝐁𝐦, who had stepped out of the office. And you guys don't even care. All you guys fucking care about is whether or not the media is gonna slam you for letting the same student, along with several others, one of which was hurt, get taken right in front of your doors. Uraraka stood up and slapped 𝐬𝐬, her expression dark. 𝐺HRO took a step back, practically able to touch her rage. Shut up, she screamed. This wasn't their fault, okay? She looked around the room, piercing everyone's eyes. This wasn't anyone's fault. Uraraka turned back to 𝐬𝐬, who was touching his face with shock. You're not the only one who had friends be taken, 𝐬𝐬, so shut up. 𝐜𝐴𝐻𝐻 pulled her into a hug from behind. Uraraka, please, she whispered. Yelling won't help anyone right now. You're right, she continued quietly. But yelling and hurting 𝐬𝐬 won't help get them back. All Might cleared his throat and crossed the room. 𝐜𝐴𝐻𝐻's right, he said calmly. And 𝐬𝐬, I promise you that we care. The media doesn't matter to us right now. He rested his hand on 𝐬𝐬's head. All Might swallowed thickly. The guilt I feel overwhelms me, he said slowly. The fact that young 𝗵𝘃𝐻 was taken once more with other precious students of mine wounds me to a place so deep. I know that I will not sleep until they are safe back with you once again. Todoroki stepped up and set his hand on 𝐬𝐬's shoulder. They'll be okay, 𝐬𝐬. We'll get them back. He met 𝐬𝐬's gaze as he walked away with Midnight. All of them. Principal 𝐁𝐦 stepped out of the office and gestured for them to come in. Your friend Todoroki is right, he said calmly. We already have several leads on where and who they may have been taken by. 𝐺HRO breathed out a sigh of relief. Will we be able to help rescue them? She asked as she and the others walked into the office. 𝐁𝐦 shrugged. I haven't the slightest idea yet. However, he added as Uraraka's face fell. Having people they already trust there to rescue them will make the operation go far smoother. 𝐬𝐬 gave a small smile. That's good. 𝐺HRO sat down next to 𝐜𝐴𝐻𝐻 and Uraraka, gripping their hands tight. 𝐁𝐦 sat on All Might's shoulders and pulled out some papers. I need to file a report, so you all will have to give me your account of what happened. I know it isn't easy, but it must be done, the principal said. 𝐜𝐴𝐻𝐻, would you please start us off? 𝐜𝐴𝐻𝐻 took a deep breath and squeezed 𝐺HRO's hands. Well, I was walking to school with 𝐺HRO and 𝐬𝐬. Sorry. You probably don't need a nickname for your reports. Anyway, we were just chatting about some homework that 𝐶EMENTOS had given us yesterday when we… She paused, choking back tears. Uraraka came over and hugged her, opting to stand by her instead of sitting. 𝐬𝐬 put his hand on her shoulder. Sorry. Anyway, she continued. We were walking when we heard Kirishima just start screaming. It sounded like he was hurt. We ran up to him, and he had these large burn marks on his chest. And a few other classmates were there too, like 𝗵𝘃𝐻, who was kneeling next to him, Sato, Mineta, us, obviously, Kaminari, Mina, and 𝐬𝐬. 𝗵𝘃𝐻 was freaking out, like, really freaking out. He started to blame Todoroki. But we all knew that he and Midoriya had gone to present Mike for help on an assignment earlier. And 𝐬𝐬 told him that. Kaminari thought that 𝗵𝘃𝐻 did it. But everyone knows that 𝗵𝘃𝐻 would never do that to Kirishima. He's like his best friend. Uraraka offered to go get help. So we all kind of just stayed low to the ground, trying to get to the school, 𝐜𝐴𝐻𝐻 said slowly, her voice growing louder and louder. Then. Her voice cracked. Kaminari and Mina screamed, and they just disappeared. There was this giant hole where they'd just been. But then it filled right back up. We all started to panic a little, because a giant hole had just taken our friends. And then I felt the ground under me start to give way. I was falling. 𝐬𝐬 and 𝐺HRO were too, and then… She wiped her eyes as invisible tears slid down her face. 𝐬𝐬, she saved us. She grabbed us and threw us out of there. But she fell down instead, and I started to cry because Sato had just been sucked in too, along with Mineta. And even though I don't really like him, he's still my classmate, and he had just disappeared. 𝐺HRO pulled her into a hug as 𝐜𝐴𝐻𝐻 started to hyperventilate. You're okay, she murmured. It's okay, we'll get them back. 𝐜𝐴𝐻𝐻 sniffled. I barely saw it, but Kirishima was sucked in too. I don't know if he was even conscious, but 𝗵𝘃𝐻 tried to save him. But he couldn't. He just grabbed me. God, he looked so upset, not even angry. He shoved me to my feet and told me to move, so I did. I didn't know what else to do. President Mike grabbed my arm and threw me to the school. But then Bakugo got sucked down, and Mr. Aizawa just jumped in after him, and Present Mike looked so scared. But by then the rest of us were in the school, and there weren't any other attacks. All Might stood up and kneeled down next to her. "Thank you, 𝐻𝐻𝐬," he said, patting her head. "And know that it was not your fault. You were very brave." 𝐻𝐻𝐬 nodded and buried her head into Gyro's shoulder. 𝐍𝐸 made eye contact with her and grimly nodded. "Guess it's my turn next," he said lightly. He was trying to lighten the mood, and it helped, it did. Just not enough to make everything okay again. "My story is basically the same thing, except I wasn't walking with them. I was just walking with Kaminari." He shuddered. It had all happened really fast. All Might turned to him and smiled gently, setting his hand on his head. "It'll be all right, 𝐍𝐸," he said calmly. "You'll get your friends back. I promise." He stood up and made eye contact with Gyro and Uraraka, both of whom looked close to tears again. "Young ladies, since you likely have similar stories, then we will wait until later to ask about them." He sighed. "You kids have been through enough today. You can take a break." Gyro was about to stand up when Present Mike opened the door. His expression was dark, angry. She'd never seen him like that before. "All Might," he said quietly. "The kid, Midoriya, he's asking for you." He hesitated, looking at the other students. "He isn't exactly doing well." Uraraka shot out of her seat. "Oh no, was he hurt? What happened? I don't remember seeing him get hurt so bad." Present Mike put a hand on her shoulder. All Might nodded. "Give me a couple of minutes alone with him, and then if he's ready and willing, you're more than welcome to go check on him." 𝐍𝐸 nodded. "So, what do we do until then?" Principal Nizu hopped off of All Might's shoulder to the door. "If you would prefer to be with the rest of your classmates, I'm sure 𝐶𝐸𝐻𝐻𝐸 will be more than willing to escort you to the dorms." Gyro nodded and helped a shaking 𝐻𝐻𝐬 to her feet. "Thanks," Gyro said quietly. "Please let us know when you find them. We want to help." All Might nodded and followed Present Mike out the door as Nezu called 𝐶𝐸𝐻𝐻𝐸 to come to the office. The four sat in wait until the teacher arrived. As the walk to the dorms, Gyro's stomach twisted. "I hope that the others aren't too shaken up. We have to work together in order to get them back." She looked at 𝐍𝐸 and made eye contact, nodding. "We will get them back. We have to." All Might followed Present Mike, wanting to run to the nurse's office. The other teacher had ignored his attempts at conversation, keeping his head low and fists clenched. All Might's heart twisted. It's easy to forget that Mike and Aizawa are close. They're so different. Present Mike stopped outside the nurse's office, turning his head to look at All Might. "I'd be careful," he murmured. "Midoriya won't be okay for a while. It's best to avoid talking about what happened. We don't know how he'll react." He swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded. Mike turned and walked away. All Might paused. "Where are you going?" Mike stopped walking. "There are blind spots on campus. Blind spots that cause students and my best friend to be taken by villains." He turned his head to All Might, causing his stomach to drop. I didn't know Mike could be that angry. Yua is supposed to be safe, but it's not. I'm gonna walk around all potential blind spots. Mark where there should be more cameras. His shoulders shook. This can't happen again. All Might hesitated, hand on the doorknob. "And what about after? What will you do then?" Mike chuckled darkly. "Aizawa has a system all across Japan. People who can help. The others wouldn't want to talk to them because some of them." He paused, trying to think of an explanation. "Don't exactly have the best reputation among heroes." All Might's eyes widened. "You mean Aizawa works with villains?" Mike snorted. "Not exactly. People who were on the wrong track. Got help from him. Some don't have the best current record, but as long as they don't hurt anybody, he doesn't care." His eyes darkened. "Anyway, at least one of them must know something. So that's where I'll go." All Might clenched his fists. "That's wrong, Mike. We don't have to resort to criminals, villains, too. If someone doesn't always make the best choice, that doesn't make them a villain. If anything, when they go to fix their lives, they are stronger than any of us," Mike growled. "And if it helps us find them sooner, then it's how we should do it." He raised his head to meet All Might's eyes. "A lot of them are good people, and those people will help us." All Might sighed. It goes against some of my beliefs. But I'll help you if you need it, he said slowly. But if they come up with something, let us know. Mike gave him a thumbs up as he walked away. No problem. All Might sighed and pinched his nose. As long as it helps. He looked at his hand on the doorknob, insides churning. He needs me. I have to be there. He took a deep breath and turned the doorknob, opening the door to greet his student. Recovery Girl was sitting next to Midoriya, rubbing his arm. The boy was practically swaddled in blankets. For the shock, they turned to him as he opened the door. Midoriya's eyes widened with hope as he whipped his head. 𝐀𝐦, he said excitedly. All Might's heart broke as his face fell, and Midoriya buried himself deeper in the blankets. Oh, he whispered. All Might crossed the room quickly and pulled him into a tight hug. Oh, my boy, he whispered. I'm here. Midoriya's small frame trembled beneath him. All Might, he whispered. I failed. All Might's heart broke as the boy burst into tears, sobbing against his chest. It was my fault. My dad. If I had just gotten a quirk. Then maybe. None of that, my boy, All Might murmured, holding him close to his chest. None of this was at all your fault. He paused as Midoriya buried his head into his chest. It wasn't your fault you didn't develop a quirk. It happens. I didn't either. The boy didn't respond, just continued to shake in his arms. Young Midoriya, your father refused to see the gifts you possessed. And I'm not talking quirks either. You're smart, determined, he said as the boy looked up at him. You never run from a fight, even when you know that you won't win. You protect people. Midoriya looked at his hands. He whispered. I couldn't protect 𝐀𝐦, or 𝐬𝐻, or Kaminari, or Mina, or Sato, or Tsu, he said as his breaths grew quicker. I couldn't protect anyone. He turned his face to meet All Might's, fat tears rolling down his cheeks. How can I call myself a hero if I can't save the people that matter to me? All Might sighed. Do you remember the conversation we had after you, Iida and Todoroki were attacked by Stain? He asked quietly, looking over at Recovery Girl. He smiled gently as he felt Midoriya nod. I told you that there were people everywhere that looked up to me. That though I could have been miles away, they believed in me. That no matter what I do, he said, making eye contact with Recovery Girl. There will always be people I can't save. People who are too far away, or even if they're right in front of me. He ran his fingers through Midoriya's hair. Heroes are people. They're not perfect. He lifted Midoriya's head and made him look at him. You're not perfect. You're still training. Midoriya shuddered and buried himself in his blankets, leaning against All Might. Why, you're right, he murmured. Geez, I'm pathetic, he said, wetly laughing. Sitting here, not doing anything. He wiped his eyes and met All Might's gaze, smiling. Where do we start searching for them? All Might grinned. That's my boy, he said. Present Mike looked at the remnants of the attack. There were still scorch marks on the ground, the area where the ground collapsed a little rocky, but secure. He gritted his teeth and kicked a rock lying next to him. Nothing. He turned his head to where the villains had likely been hiding. Sure enough, the grass was crushed, slightly burnt. It was uneven, and a circle of dirt remained. Must have been how they got in. Mike clenched his fists as he looked at the spot where 𝐸𝐸 had disappeared. They knew where the blind spot was. They knew. But how? He sighed, putting his fists in his pockets. His little investigation was getting him nowhere. He'd already circled around to where all the cameras were, marking down blind spots. He closed his eyes and leaned back against a tree, hugging his knees. Mike looked at Nezu anxiously. Come on, you gotta know something, he said desperately. A lead or two, anything. We have to get them back. Nezu sighed. All we know is that Mitsuki Midoriya was likely the culprit of the burn marks, he said calmly. He escaped from prison last night, after being convicted of assault, illegal quirk use, child endangerment, domestic violence, and property damage. Midoriya clearly had an associate, maybe more. They were in a blind spot of the cameras, so we don't have a clear idea yet. It was someone who knew the school, knew where the blind spots and cameras were. Since Midoriya has never set foot in UA, or seen blueprints, that rules him out. Mike clenched his fists. Then we see if any of the other cameras got something. Anything. His throat swelled. We just lost 5 students, one of whom has already been kidnapped before, and a teacher. How the hell does this keep happening? Midnight rested her hand on Mike's. Hisashi, I feel the same way you do, We all do, she said, looking at All Might. But right now we need to stay calm and think rationally. Mike shot up from his chair, knocking it over. He slammed his hands on Nezu's desk. I don't give a damn about thinking rationally, he yelled. Right now we need to find them before anybody else gets hurt. Before they get hurt. He turned to Midnight, slapping her hand away. And if I have to do it by myself, then God help me I will. He stormed out of the classroom, barely noticing the kids in the chairs. I shouldn't explode in front of them, he thought. But if this place doesn't get its act together, what then? He buried his fists in his pockets as he stomped down the stairs, keeping his eyes on the ground in case anyone saw the tears that threatened to flow. He only looked up when he heard footsteps coming from the nurse's office. Recovery girl walked over to him quickly and tugged on his jacket, nearly causing him to stumble. Mike, you're here. I need you to go fetch All Might for me, and quickly. Mike looked at the door of the office, and he could hear the faint cries of young Midoriya. His heart broke. No problem, Rira, he said brightly. I'll go get him. Quickly now, she called after him. He needs support right now. Support that only All Might can give. Mike looked up at the sky, rage flowing through his veins. I'll get you back, he vowed to himself. No matter the cost. Aizawa's head felt like it was hammering against his skull. He groaned, wanting the background noise to stop. What was that background noise, anyway? He couldn't remember where he was. He deemed the background noise to be voices, and why the hell were they so loud? The only people who could match that level of annoying were his students, and they were. He opened his eyes and shot forward, as it all came crashing back down to him. The school. Midoriya's father. Holes. Danger. Injuries. He whipped his head around, feeling slightly relieved as he saw Sato without any injuries. What happened? He asked. Is everyone all right? Sato let out a sigh of relief, and Mina popped into view as she kneeled next to Aizawa. You're awake, she exclaimed. Thank goodness, we were getting worried. We didn't know how long her quirk would last, or how it even works, and I was getting pretty freaked out. Don't overwhelm him, Mina, Asui said, putting a hand on her shoulder. She looked at her teacher. Are you okay, Mr. Aizawa? We didn't see any injuries, but you were out a lot longer than we were. He nodded, feeling for his goggles. He relaxed as he felt them resting comfortably against his collarbone. Who else was taken? He asked. Kaminari raised his hand. Me, Asui, Mina, Sato, Maita, and Bakugo. His face fell. We don't know where they took Kirishima, he said, looking at Bakugo. Bakugo grunted. Those assholes are holding him hostage, he said angrily. I can't even kick their ass, otherwise they'll kill him. Aizawa felt worry prick him. From what Uraraka had told him, Kirishima had been injured. If they're holding him hostage, then we can't do anything. Especially try to escape. He gripped his goggles. I've dealt with hostage situations before. But never with a student, and never while being locked up. Mina looked towards the wall to Aizawa's back fearfully. Guys, there are footsteps. Aizawa turned around as part of the wall opened and a man looked through, only his face down to his shoulders. Not big enough to have Maita slip through. He stood up, making sure his students were behind him. Who are you? He asked calmly, disguising his anger. The man ignored him and looked behind Aizawa. Katsuki, my boy, he said smoothly. How are you feeling? Are you thirsty? Go fuck yourself, Bakugo shouted angrily. And don't fucking call me that, the man sighed. You'll come around eventually, son. Aizawa narrowed his eyes. So he knows Bakugo. Why is he calling him son? Aizawa thought. He sure as hell isn't Bakugo's father. They look and act nothing alike. He stood in front of the man, blocking the view of his students. Who are you? He asked coldly. What did you do to my student? The man tilted his head in confusion. Then it seemed to click. Oh, you mean the redhead? He shrugged. He's fine. Just some burns, but we've taken care of it. He grinned. You're a racerhead, aren't you? He asked. My son was always obsessed with heroes. You were one of his favorites, if I'm not mistaken. A sick look of pride crossed his face. And now he's on his way to becoming one. I'm so proud. Aizawa grimaced, bracing himself to use his quirk. Before he could, the ground beneath him shook, almost throwing him off balance. What the hell? He took a step backwards, making eye contact. The man tutted. Now, Eraserhead. I don't want you here either, but until my son arrives, you and your students are going to have to behave and stay here. Kaminari stood up and stood by Aizawa, rage clear on his face. You're friggin' sick, you know that? Electricity circled his fingertips. If it weren't for the fact that you have Kirishima, I'd kick your ass right here, right now. Kaminari, that's enough, Aizawa said sternly, looking back to face the man, who shrugged. I just want my sons to be with me. And my dearest 𝐬𝐻𝐽. But for now I'll settle. The man rubbed his fingers through his hair. Katsuki and Izuku are on their way straight to the top. He grinned eagerly as Aizawa started. How does he know? We were allowed to watch the sports festival. My son has a hell of a quirk, doesn't he? He smiled. Must have been my own and your training that finally kicked it into action. So thank you. I'll be taking him back now. Aizawa tensed. He can't be fucking serious. His training. Midoriya didn't get his quirk until middle school, so how the hell? It dawned on Aizawa just as 𝐵AKYUGO launched himself forward, only to be held back by Aizawa. You'll never be my dad, he screeched, thrusting his face into the stranger's. And Deku's not fucking dumb enough to let you be his either, the man sighed. Katsuki, you're one of the brightest boys I've ever met. Hell, he said proudly, you even won the sports festival. But I don't expect you to understand. Not yet. Mina stepped forward, her earlier fears forgotten. What have you done with Kirishima? She demanded to know. So help me, if you've hurt him any further, I'll boil your eyes out. The stranger chuckled. Well, they're a wild bunch, he said, looking at Aizawa. The kid's fine, just a bit of a burn. We've bandaged and treated it. In a few days, he'll be just fine. Maybe even before that, he said calmly. It depends on when Izuku gets here. Aizawa glared daggers at him. Are you telling me that you'll torture him until he gets here, you fucking monster? He seethed. The man gasped. Of course not, he's just a boy. The man shook his head as though disappointed. No, we won't hurt him. If it weren't for the wind and my own bad aim, he wouldn't even be here right now. I promise you, the only people I care about as of right now are Katsuki and Izuku. Mineta snorted. You're pretty bad at holding people hostage, he said, earning him a smack to the head. Their captor sighed. Again, we aren't trying to hold any of you hostage. It just so happens that my friend who transported you all has rather terrible aim. His face darkened. Practicing your quirk isn't exactly allowed unless you're a hero. Aizawa felt his blood boil. He seems calm, but I can tell that he's antsy. He really must have not attempted to take us all. This man obviously knows that Yua and other pro heroes will be after him, especially after taking 𝐵AKYUGO and I. He had a feeling that once Kirishima was returned, their captors would be figuring out a plan to let the rest of them go, without letting 𝐵AKYUGO escape as well. This is going to be complicated. But I still have one question. Who are you? Aizawa asked. Obviously, you know 𝐵AKYUGO and Midoriya well enough to be comfortable saying their given names. The man brightened. I'm so glad you asked, he said, sticking out his hand. Hisashi Midoriya, but you can call me Flash Fire. Hisashi's eyes softened as Aizawa's own widened. Flash Fire was the hero name my son gave me. Oh, how smart he is, 𝐵AKYUGO snorted. First off, you're not allowed to call me Katsuki. Call me that again and I'll blow your head off. Second, the only thing we'll ever call you is an asshole and an idiot. Hisashi seemed genuinely hurt as he sighed. Katsuki, 𝐵AKYUGO burst forward and smacked him through the opening. Don't fucking call me that, he screamed. Aizawa grabbed his arm and yanked him backwards, throwing him to the floor. Hisashi stood perfectly still, eyes filling with rage, but face remaining calm. 𝐵AKYUGO, he said slowly. I only say that because I love and care about you. You're my son. 𝐵AKYUGO's face twisted in rage. No, you're fucking not, he shrieked. You're not my fucking father. You'll never be my father. You'll never be stupid Deku's father, either. You gave up the right to be a father the moment you decided abusing your fucking son and wife was acceptable. He was pulsing with rage. Hisashi tensed. It was not abuse, he said coldly. I love my wife and my son. All I want is to help Izuku reach his full potential. Same goes for you. If you join me, you'll be the #1 hero before you know it, he smiled. Isn't that what you've always wanted? Aizawa blocked Hisashi's view of 𝐵AKYUGO, seething. 𝐵AKYUGO has already refused to join villains, so why the hell would he join you, he asked. Hisashi opened his mouth to respond when they heard a familiar voice echoing. Tears of joy sprung from Mina's lips. Kirishima. The redhead stumbled into view, being shoved by a short, dark-haired woman. Aizawa's eyes hardened as they shoved his student through the wall, a barely big enough hole letting him through. Aizawa bent over, looking over his student. He was shirtless save for his uniform jacket, which was singed at the front edges. A bandage was wrapped around his chest, but other than that he seemed unharmed. Kirishima looked behind him, scowling. "Touch me again and see what happens, asshole," he muttered. He looked around, worry and relief flashing across his face. "You guys are okay, thank God," he said as Mina pounced on him, hugging him. "The hag told me that you guys were here too, and I didn't know if anyone was hurt, or..." The woman cut him off with a raise of her hand, and Kirishima stumbled, almost falling save for Aizawa catching him. "Unless you feel like having another nap," she said slowly, "I'd recommend you not call me a hag again." Hisashi put a hand on her shoulder and smiled. Now, May, I'm sure he didn't mean it. Poor boy is just scared." He glared at Kirishima. "Apologize to May now, will you?" Kirishima stuck out his tongue in response, causing a few giggles from the students. Kaminari looked up from where he'd moved closer to Kirishima. "Go to hell, hag," the woman practically growled. Aizawa narrowed his eyes. So her quirk causes people to fall asleep, similar to midnight. "We'll have to be careful of that." Hisashi clapped his hands. "It's been wonderful chatting with all of you, truly. But unfortunately I have other business to attend to at the moment. Don't worry, soon you all will be released. And if anyone is hungry, just give May a shout and she'll let me know." Kaminari glared at him. "And how do you know we won't try to escape? We're US students, heroes in training. How could you possibly think that you can hold us?" Sato nodded. "You don't have any hostages for us to worry about. Therefore, we could kill you quite easily." Hisashi chuckled darkly. "Because if you do try to escape, then 𝐶𝐍𝐻 will simply make the floor beneath you vanish. And beneath you, there just so happens to be explosives. Sure, some of you could maybe survive. Maybe. But not all of you." He grinned darkly as the wall closed. "Don't go anywhere." Aizawa stood there for a moment. He knew that name, 𝐶𝐍𝐻, but he didn't know where. He wasn't in contact with anyone with anything even close to that name. So why is it familiar? Kirishima groaned and slumped against the wall. "This friggin' sucks," he said angrily. He nodded his head as Aizawa asked him if he was all right. "I'm fine, really," he said quietly. "But I can't help but feel guilty that you're all here." Aizawa motioned for the others to quiet down as a burst of protest spilled from their lips. "Think about it, guys," he said angrily. "If I had been stronger, then nothing would have happened to me, and you all wouldn't have been there, and none of you would be here right now." Bakugo shook his head. "That doesn't change anything, shitty hair," he grunted. "Regardless of who it was, we would have been there. And even if you had been able to activate your quirk in time, you'd still be hurt." He rolled his eyes. "Honestly, you've been burned by Todoroki while you were hardened, so he's no different." Aizawa felt pride blossom in him. As much as Bakugo denies it, he really does care. He slouched as he heard Mineta start to panic. "We'll never get out of here, there are explosives everywhere," he screamed. "We're all gone." Aizawa mouthed a thank you as Asui smacked Mineta upside the head. "Shut up," she said angrily. She turned to Aizawa. "So what do we do now?" Sato sat next to Mina, thinking. "The school will obviously know we're gone by now," he said slowly. "Which means that everyone is probably on lockdown right now. I don't know if our classmates will be a part of the rescue party once they figure out where we are." Mina shook her head. "Probably not. They wouldn't want to risk anyone else being taken or injured." "Maybe they think it's the Lodge of Villains?" Kirishima asked. Bakugo cleared his throat, and everyone looked at him. "You're all idiots. And here's why, Kaminari, don't give me that look. Just shut up and listen to me." He sighed, leaning back against the wall. "Hisashi is supposed to be in jail right now. I bet that he's been planning this for a long time, which is why when he escaped, the first thing he did was try to grab me and Deku. He would have known that his time before we were alerted that he escaped was short." Kaminari tilted his head in confusion. "I get that he's Midoriya's dad, but why would he want you? And why call you his son?" Bakugo rolled his eyes. "I don't know what his deal is," he said. "But he's always wanted a kid with a powerful quirk. Someone he could control when they got to the top." Asui frowned. "You're saying that he wants to control the #1 hero. But that doesn't make sense. Why would he do that when he could just fight for the top spot himself?" Kirishima shrugged. "Think about it. Even if it wasn't All Might at the top, or Endeavor, in order to get there you have to be really strong. Like, really strong. So, if they went bad, It'd be really difficult to put a stop to them. Aizawa nodded. You all make very good points, he said. And Sato is likely right. The school will definitely be on lockdown now, and unless they really need it, they won't ask the students to help. Or if they don't want anyone else to know about it. This will be the second time in 1 year a person has been taken. This time, it's the same person and a teacher. Mina shrugged. As far as we know, they have 3 people. Hisashi, Mei, and some girl named Seriha. Hisashi breathes fire. Mei can put people to sleep, and Seriha can mess with the floors. 4. Everyone turned to Bakugo, who looked at Kaminari. There's 4 people, at least. Kaminari frowned. And how do you know that? You woke up after I did, and we never saw anybody. Bakugo ran his fingers through his hair. Kirishima already knows this. Last night, I hadn't been able to sleep, so I decided to go downstairs and get a snack or something. I didn't feel like taking the stairs, so I got in the elevator. But, he said with a sigh, the elevator shut down before I got there. It must have been a power outage or something. So, of course, I figured that it was Pikachu being stupid. But when I got down there was no sign of his usual mess. Kaminari scoffed. I do not leave a mess, he said sharply. He winced as everyone stared at him. It's not a mess, it's organic chaos. Mina sat down, thinking hard. I woke up at around 1 a.m. maybe, she said slowly. I noticed the power had gone out, but I guess I just thought it was Kaminari. Kaminari threw his hands in the air. Of course, whenever anything power-wise happens, it's my fault, he said angrily. Come on, guys. I'm not that irresponsible. If I did something like that, I'd say something right away. Bakugo nodded. That's my point, dumbass. If it was you, then you would have woken someone up. Sato clapped his hands. Meaning that someone has the ability to shut off the power. Aizawa nodded. You all are making very good points. And Bakugo, you're probably right that they shut off the power to scope out the weak spots. Good thinking. He looked around. I'm assuming they took our phones away so we couldn't send anything, Kirishima nodded. When I woke up I didn't have mine. He looked at Aizawa. But I think you still have yours. He giggled as Aizawa's eyes widened, and he checked his back pocket. I'm so used to it being there that I would have noticed if it was gone. I'm so dumb. Mr. Aizawa, got any service? Aizawa shook his head. Not a bar. We're probably still somewhere close to the school, though it's only been about an hour since we were taken. And I think we were all only out for around 45 minutes. Bakugo shrugged. When I fell in and rolled for maybe 2 minutes before Mei knocked me out with her quirk. Everyone nodded in agreement as Bakugo continued. But if nobody else but you has their phone, that means you're our best bet. Aizawa shook his head. I can't message anybody without service, Bakugo. As someone who's always on their phone, you would think you would know that. Minta looked at him quizzically. You don't need service to take a turn on Jumbleword, do you? The ball boy shrugged as Aizawa stared at him. What? Isn't that the game you and Mike play all the time? If you do a turn, they'll at least know we're okay. Aizawa grinned. Minta, that's the smartest thing you've said all year. He ignored his cry of outrage as he opened the app. He took a deep breath as he saw what word he'd have to use. If I do that, I'll lose. Hisashi will never let me live it down. He took a deep breath and swallowed his pride. These brats owe me big time. As he arranged the word, he prayed that it would work. Oh, the irony. Everyone held their breath as it loaded. And loaded. And loaded. Word sent. Aizawa breathed out a sigh of relief and put his phone back in his pocket, turning to his students. At least we have that. But we still need to figure out how to get out. Asui shook her head. I can't believe that our school has blind spots right by the entrance. Aizawa shrugged. There aren't many, but apparently there are enough for this to happen, he said reluctantly. If I know High Present Mike, he's probably scouting the whole school figuring out where they are. I know where all of them are, Minta said proudly. He winced under the glares. What? Sometimes I have to pee and can't make it to the bathroom in time. Everyone groaned, scooting even further away from Minta. So help me, I'm gonna expel that child. Pull shit like that again and you're out of UA, Aizawa warned. The only reason I haven't expelled you yet is because you have a half-decent quirk and some good ideas. Mina leaned against Kirishima, using his shoulder as a pillow. So, she started. If they attacked from one of the camera's blind spots, that means they have someone who knows where they are. and maybe even the layout of the school. Kirishima nodded. When they came and turned off the power last night, they also turned off the cameras, meaning that they could go anywhere. Aizawa couldn't stop the bloom of pride in his chest. These kids have survived a lot. They aren't people anyone should underestimate. He turned to Bakugo as the blonde spoke. I never liked Deku. He growled at Mina as she snorted. Shut up, Pink. As much as I hate Deku, and I hate him, Bakugo looked at his hands. I don't hate his mom, 𝐀𝐦. Our families lived right next to each other, and even though Deku was annoying, Aunt 𝐀𝐦 was always a good person. She still is. She's probably the only reason I'm still here. He leaned back against the wall, relaxing. She saved us from Hisashi when we were kids. That's when he was arrested. Aizawa softened as he sat on the ground closer to his student. Bakugo ignored him. My parents were out of town for the weekend, so naturally I was sent to their house. And, well, his face darkened. Hisashi wanted to show me how he trained Deku, trying to get him a quirk. It was awful. He sighed, running his fingers through his hair. 𝐀𝐦 managed to get us out, but he burned her. He burned his own wife, his own child. Bakugo looked up and made eye contact with Aizawa. I want Hisashi to suffer, just like he made them suffer. Mina gasped. Wait, if Hisashi escaped from prison to get you guys, do you think he'll go for her next? Aizawa nodded grimly. But from the way he was talking, it sounds like he wants Midoriya first. And I have no doubt that 𝐀𝐦 is under protection as we speak. But, he said as he got back up, we need to get out of here. Kirishima looked away from everyone, cheeks darkening. I think that we should stay put for now, he said quietly. Bakugo turned on him, rage in his eyes. You can't be fucking serious, dude. We gotta get out of here and kick some ass. Kirishima stood up and faced him. Nobody knows where we are. Bakugo, he said, voice raising slightly. If we tried to escape now, and something went wrong, nothing will go wrong, shitty hair, Bakugo yelled. What are you, a coward? He shrugged off Aizawa's hand on his shoulder. I'm leaving, Kirishima, he said slowly. With or without you. That's enough, Aizawa said strictly, shoving the two apart. Nobody is being left behind. Kirishima, Aizawa said, calming down. I get why you might be hesitant, but we do have to get out. We can't afford to stay here. The group sat in silence for a few minutes. Everyone could feel the anger in the air. Sato was the first to break the silence. How could someone do that? He murmured. How could someone hurt their own wife, their own kid? Kirishima laughed bitterly. It's not something big and flashy like a villain, he said. So heroes don't tend to care about that kind of shit. They just leave it to the cops. Asui stood up, fists clenched. What's wrong with all of us today? She asked quietly. We're heroes, yet we're sitting around here pouting. We have to do something. She turned to Aizawa, determination in her eyes. Hisashi said that if we tried anything, Seriha would make the floor disappear. Mineta nodded. He also said that there was TNT below us, too. Asui frowned. They wouldn't be able to light it from outside, except for Hisashi. But I don't think they'll do that, she said, turning to look at Bakugo. He wants to break you, Bakugo. He wants to make you lose hope in everything but him. Bakugo scoffed. Not gonna fucking happen. Asui shook her head. Don't you guys get it yet? She asked, frustration leaking into her tone. They won't use Hisashi to light the TNT, because he doesn't want to hurt Bakugo. Meaning that he's relying on someone else to light it. Someone inside the room. Bakugo's eyes widened, then narrowed in anger. If we were to fall, I'd use my explosions to stay up. He's counting on that. Kaminari gasped. Your sparks would ignite them, and probably make it kill us. And you'd probably be the only survivor, because you can use your own explosions to combat them. Aizawa frowned. He must have been planning this for a while. He's taken everything into account, including other people being a setback. If we don't want to ignite the TNT, then Bakugo wouldn't be able to support himself, and would fall. He wouldn't be able to get back up either. Meaning that the only people who have a good chance of staying up would be Asui, Mineta, and maybe myself. Asui can only hold about 3 people with her Townge. Mina jumped up. Meaning that the rest of us would fall. Aizawa stared at her for a moment, then grinned. Did you guys hear that? He asked. Everyone looked at him confused. Aizawa sighed. You kids really have a lot to learn, he said. When Mina jumped, there wasn't an echo. Everyone sat still for a moment. Then the silence erupted into groans. "Are you kidding me?" Kaminari said, exasperated. "All this time we were worried about blowing up, when everything was fine." Aizawa chuckled. "Not gonna lie, that was a good bluff. Guess they forgot how sound works. When we're getting out, we will still need something to cling to in case 𝐬𝐬 makes the floor disappear." Sato smiled and pointed to Mayuta. "What if we used his balls? They're sticky, and while they don't stick to him, he can still hold on to them." Mina grinned. "We can use our jackets to make gloves of some sort, so that they don't stick directly to us. Everyone, give me your jackets, I'll use my acid." As his students huddled around Mina and Mayuta, Aizawa's confidence grew. They were going to get out of this. And he'd make sure that his students were safe, no matter what. Hisashi stopped mid-stride as his phone buzzed, and he pulled it out of his pocket. He grinned as he realized that he had not as much to worry about. Hisashi could have laughed at the irony.